A single number, just one, and suddenly the entire story starts to crack. Because what happens when the very first detail someone ever gave the world about themselves doesn't match the version they later built their identity on?
Bauer, the legendary royal author, is sharpening his quill.
The perfect day to address a theory that many people out there have been speculating on, that Meghan Markle has lied about her age.
I recently visited Northwestern. She's a graduate there, that's just north of Chicago. They said, we have a lot of famous alums. Northwestern's a one.
The moment that footage resurfaces, it doesn't feel like an old childhood clip anymore. It feels like evidence hiding in plain sight. A young Meghan Markle, calm, confident, looking straight into the camera with the certainty most adults struggle to fake, and then she says it. Not hesitantly, not unsure. She says it like it's fact. My name is Meghan Markle. I'm 12 years old. 12, that number lands heavier than it should. Because the official timeline says something else entirely.
Accidentally became a female advocate. See, I had been in school watching a TV show in elementary.
And once that contradiction exists, it doesn't sit quietly. It starts pulling everything else with it. Because here's the problem no one can ignore. If the official birth year is August 4th, 1981, then in early 1993, Meghan Markle wasn't 12. Meghan Markle was 11, not almost 12, not rounding up, 11. And suddenly, the origin story, the polished, repeated, carefully delivered story about being an 11-year-old who challenged injustice starts to feel adjusted, curated, refined for impact. Because 11 works better, doesn't it? It sounds younger, more powerful, more extraordinary. But the tape doesn't say 11, the tape says 12. And tapes don't rewrite themselves later to match a narrative. And then something even stranger happens.
People out there have been speculating on that Meghan Markle has lied about her age. Is she actually older?
That same story, the one repeated at the United Nations, the one presented as the foundation of Meghan Markle's public identity, doesn't survive fact-checking at Vanity Fair. Not corrected, not clarified, removed, completely removed. Think about that for a second. A story strong enough to be told on a global stage couldn't pass the scrutiny of a magazine editorial team.
She was 21 years old at the time of publication. That would make her birth year at around 1976.
That's not a small crack. That's structural. So now the question isn't just about one number anymore. It's about patterns. Because patterns don't lie quietly. They build. The first pattern surfaces in something so ordinary it almost feels invisible, a Sears questionnaire. Not a tabloid leak. Not an attack piece. A standard commercial document filled out in the normal course of business. And yet, in that document, Meghan Markle's age isn't listed as a child. It's listed as 21. Not 12. Not 13. 21. A 9-year gap. And 9 years isn't a typo. 9 years is a completely different identity. Now pause, because this wasn't produced by critics or enemies. This wasn't speculation. This was routine paperwork created by people who had absolutely no reason to inflate a child's age.
So, it sounded more like a seductive commercial of sorts than...
So how does a number like that appear? Accident? Maybe, but then it happens again, and again, and again. Because the second crack comes from Humphrey Yogurt, a detail Meghan Markle herself shared. A relatable story, a teenage job, a humanizing moment. Except the company itself steps in and says something that stops everything cold. They never employed anyone that young. Not ever. Now it's no longer just a memory issue. It's a direct contradiction from the source. And then the third piece drops into place. A March 1997 issue of 17 magazine listing Meghan Markle as 21 years old. A national publication. Millions of readers. Editorial oversight. And if that number is accurate, if that listing was printed and distributed, then the timeline shifts dramatically. Because 21 in 1997 doesn't lead back to 1981. It leads somewhere else entirely. Now step back and look at it. 3 completely separate sources. A retail questionnaire, a company statement, a national magazine, no connection, no shared motive, and yet all pointing in the same direction. Older than 1981. Not once, not twice, repeatedly, and this is where it stops feeling like coincidence and starts feeling like a pattern. Because individually, each piece can be explained away. A clerical error, a misremembered detail, a printing mistake. But together they begin to form something else entirely, a cluster that refuses to align with the official story. And the deeper you go, the more uncomfortable it becomes. Because because once documents start disagreeing, attention shifts to something even harder to argue with photographs. Moments frozen in time, context embedded in the background, details no one thought would matter until they did, because suddenly the contradictions collide with something that looks like clarity, but instead of resolving the confusion, it deepens it. The 1995 graduation image surfaces, the embroidered 95 sitting there like a timestamp no one expected anyone to question. On the surface, it feels definitive. If someone graduates at 18 in 1995, the math is simple. It pulls everything back to 1977. Clean, direct damning, but then the counter explanation arrives and it's not weak, it's solid. The 1995 image belongs to a middle school graduation, not a high school one. The real high school graduation under the 1981 timeline lands in 1999. Documented, confirmed, supported, so the contradiction doesn't collapse, it mutates. Because the question shifts. If the 1999 record exists, and it does then, why was the 1995 image chosen for one of the most scrutinized public announcements imaginable? Why reach for the one photograph that creates confusion instead of the one that removes it? That's not an accident. That's a decision. And decisions like that don't happen without reason. And then Northwestern University quietly enters the frame, and suddenly it's not just about age anymore, it's about identity details that should be simple, verifiable, unquestionable, the degree, the exact wording. International relations. Repeated publicly, confidently, except Northwestern University doesn't offer that as an undergraduate major. It never has. The official confirmation says international studies. Close enough to sound believable, but not the same. Not technically, not academically. And when someone repeatedly states the wrong version of their own qualification in settings where accuracy is expected, it raises a different kind of question, one that isn't about memory anymore, but about consistency. And then everything circles back to the one document that could silence all of this in a single moment: the birth certificate. Not an index entry, not a database listing, the actual original primary record. The kind of document that ends debates, closes investigations, shuts down speculation permanently. And yet, it never appears. Not once, not during media scrutiny, not during legal battles, not during public challenges. It stays out of sight. And absence in a situation like this doesn't feel neutral. It feels intentional, because the supporting evidence that does exist, the California Birth Index, the official filings, those aren't primary documents. They reflect what was submitted. They don't independently prove it. And that distinction becomes impossible to ignore when everything else refuses to align cleanly. Then the family enters the story, and instead of resolving anything, the contradictions multiply. Thomas Markle stands firm on 1981, unwavering, consistent in every statement. But even Thomas Markle never produces the paper. Not once. Not when it would have mattered most. And then Samantha Markle introduces something entirely different, 1977 in court filings, 1981 in a published book, two separate records, two separate answers, both from the same source. And then another number appears in legal correspondence, a 16-year gap that points somewhere else entirely. Now there isn't one timeline. There are several, all existing at the same time, none fully aligning. And this is where the story takes its most unsettling turn, not because of what is proven, but because of what becomes possible. When records don't agree, when timelines refuse to settle, when even the closest sources can't present a single unified version, theories begin to form, not as wild speculation, but as logical attempts to explain the gaps. And once that door opens, it doesn't close easily, because by the time Tom Bauer steps into the narrative, this isn't just curiosity anymore, it's a structured investigation, a career built on dismantling carefully constructed public images, a method that looks for inconsistencies and follows them relentlessly. And when Tom Bauer identifies the same gaps already visible across documents, photographs, and statements, the tone shifts again. This isn't noise, this is alignment. And while responses come statements, dismissals, carefully chosen language, something crucial never comes with them. No documents, no definitive proof, just words. And outside of the narrative, something else starts happening quietly, almost unnoticed at first: real-world consequences. Organizations distancing. Partnerships dissolving, numbers shifting, not opinions, not headlines, actual measurable outcomes. Because when sponsors step back and institutions withdraw support, they aren't reacting to rumors, they're reacting to data. And the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. An announcement is made, a number is given, and somewhere underneath it, another number appears that doesn't match. No explanation follows, no correction arrives, the gap just stays there. And then another announcement replaces it, drawing attention away just long enough for the previous inconsistency to fade into the background.